Hi everyone. In the last video I talked a little bit about the colour options that you can choose and dithering to make the image look better, and I thought I'd go through that in a little bit more detail to explain some of the options and what's going on when you see the banding happening. So first of all, the reality is DMC make around 450 colours. Here's an image of various thread colours, and I mean it's a lot of colours, but it's not all the colours. If you actually look at the full, what's called the gamut of the full colour range, this is the spectrum of every possible colour on my monitor. They don't make a thread of every single colour. It would be millions and millions of thread variations. So they do certain colours and skip others. And this is noticeable if I add a spectrum image, that same image, to the pattern maker, where there's not an intermediate colour, it has to pick the closest one, and that's why you get these areas of solid blocks of colour where at a certain point it crosses a threshold and now this is the closer colour than the previous one. Now obviously the more colours you set the pattern to have, the more smaller variations it can add, but it adds to the number of colours in the pattern, which makes it more complex. And you can never get rid of this banding. The colours don't actually exist as thread colours. So what do we do to make our image look good? Well, this is where dithering comes in. And dithering is where you take the colours that cross over like this and you gradually start to mix them, so you can make the eye see different colours by gradually mixing them together. And the different dithering options create different effects in the image. So here's one, you see you get this more confetti effect, which is harder to stitch because there's more changes, but the final image is closer to the original. Now some of these dithering algorithms, they basically use different maths to come up with the patterns. Some of them still produce some banding effects, which doesn't blend the colours as well, but you shouldn't discount these because they do actually make the pattern slightly easier to stitch, and very often this is enough to just fool the eye into thinking that there's a smoother graduation between colours in the image. Now if you're dealing with a picture that doesn't have lots of smooth colour variations, so let's just zoom out, or is kind of a busy and detailed image, you won't see the problem so much. Where it becomes really apparent is if you have smooth gradients, so things like skin tones or the sky and sunsets, so things like this where you get a gradual fade effect. If I turn off the dithering, you'll see you get the banding effect. And I have another example here of a landscape image. Again, you see these bands of colours, but then if you turn the dithering on, you get a much smoother, nicer image, but it's going to be more difficult to stitch and take more time. Now the dithering, even if you have a picture that has some detail, still plays a part. So let's take this sample image of a dog. This is great. Now the bit your eye tends to focus on is the dog's face and the detail, and that looks great. If we turn off the dithering, what becomes more noticeable are these background areas, and this is, in photography, this is called the bokeh effect of the lens. It's the out of focus area and how that becomes kind of blurred and merged together. Now without dithering, these show up more, so you get these big patches of colour, and you may decide, well, I'm just going to stitch that as is because it makes it quicker and easier to stitch, and it's fine. If you have more colours, obviously it will lessen the impact of the banding. And you can see how much easier that pattern is. There's solid blocks of the same colours. But if you add the dithering, it makes the pattern more complex, but it also makes it look much better. And it's one of these subtle things that you may not really notice, but it just makes the image just a little bit more refined. So it's maybe worth considering as an option, even if you've got a detailed image. The other thing with colour is if you're dealing with actual colour images, the number of colours you need is always much higher than if you choose one of the effects, such as grayscale or sepia tone. The reason for that is these are just based on the shade of the or the intensity of the colour, whereas colour actually has three components to it: red, green, and blue. So you can have the same colour in terms of shade with two different colours in the image. When you switch it to use just a single colour, so grayscale, the number of colours you then need to represent those different intensities is much smaller. So you can actually vastly reduce the number of colours that you need and still get a picture that looks really good. So if you want to simplify an image, and your image suits, say maybe you've got a picture of an old car, for instance. Let me just find an example. So here's an old car from a show and shine. With colour, you need much more colours to make it look really good, even with dithering enabled. If we turn off dithering, you'll see as I reduce the colours, you see already there's more bands where you've got these smoother variations. If you go down to much smaller number of colours, down into the 20s, 30s, it really starts to break apart. If I turn on a single tone, it suddenly springs back to life, and you've got a much richer looking picture, even though the smaller colours. You can then add dithering as well still, so that you get slightly smoother variations between the changes. So that's a couple of the options for choosing colours, choosing dithering options. Play around with them, see what you think. Thanks.